In the unforgiving world of professional wrestling, talent doesn't always guarantee gold. While Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair basked in championship glory, some of the most gifted performers in wrestling history watched from the sidelines as lesser talents wore the crown they deserved. These aren't forgotten jobbers. These are main event caliber superstars who drew money, stole shows, and captivated audiences worldwide. From technical masters to charismatic showmen, from hardcore legends to high-flying innovators, they had everything it takes to be champion except the one thing that mattered most: the right timing, the right politics, or the right connections. Prepare to discover the stories of wrestling's most talented runners-up, the superstars who conquered everything in the ring except the one prize that would have cemented their legacy forever. First up, the British Bulldog. The British Bulldog was one of the most athletic powerhouses in wrestling. He went from being a young prodigy in England to becoming WWE's proud European hero, creating an unforgettable moment when he defeated Bret Hart for the Intercontinental Championship. At a time when bigger meant better, Davey Boy Smith pushed his body to dangerous limits, building his superhuman physique through whatever means necessary. And in 2002, at just 39 years old, the Bulldog's heart would give out from years of abuse. In 1962, David Smith was born in a working-class corner of Lancashire, England. He would transform from a boy watching wrestling on his family's modest television set into one of Britain's most formidable ring warriors, though the path there wasn't what most fans believe. Growing up in Goulburn, Lancashire, where luxury was scarce but dreams were abundant, young David found his escape in the electrifying world of professional wrestling. Huddled around the television with his siblings Terrence, Joanne, and Tracy, he'd watch in awe as larger-than-life characters like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks battled their opponents. These moments planted the seeds of his future, though none could have predicted just how far they'd grow. At just 15 years old, Smith's passion couldn't be contained any longer. He stepped into the training ring, where something remarkable became immediately apparent. This teenager possessed an almost supernatural aptitude for the sport. His raw talent was so impressive that it caught the attention of producers at ITV's World of Sport, Britain's premier wrestling showcase. In an era when breaking into television, wrestling was about as likely as winning the lottery, Smith had done it before he could even legally drive. A young star was rising in British wrestling, and all eyes were on the prodigy from Lancashire. Smith's natural talent translated into an explosive presence both as a singles competitor and in tag team action. In the singles ranks, his ascent was meteoric, coming within a heartbeat of capturing the prestigious British Welterweight Championship while still a teenager. But it was his partnership with cousin Tom Billington that would change wrestling history. Billington, who carved out his own fearsome reputation as the Dynamite Kid, formed an alliance with Smith that caught the attention of a crucial visitor from across the Atlantic. Bruce Hart, son of legendary promoter Stu Hart, was scouring the UK for fresh talent when he witnessed the raw power and agility of these two British phenoms. The opportunity Hart presented was too tempting to ignore. A chance to wrestle for the renowned Stampede Wrestling promotion in Calgary, Canada. In an era when breaking into North American wrestling was the dream of every European grappler, Smith and Billington had their golden ticket. What they couldn't know was that this move would set them on a path to revolutionize tag team wrestling forever. The infamous Hart Dungeon awaited in Calgary, a proving ground that had forged some of wrestling's greatest talents through pain and perseverance. For Smith and Billington, their British Commonwealth citizenship opened the door to this temple of technical wrestling. But what happened inside would test their limits in ways they never imagined. Under the watchful eye of Stu Hart, a man whose reputation for turning wrestlers into legitimate tough guys was known worldwide, the two Brits endured daily torture sessions that would make ordinary men quit. The dungeon's concrete floor and low ceiling became their classroom, with every submission hold, every stretch, and every grunt of pain molding them into something far beyond their early promise. But it was what happened after their graduation from this brutal finishing school that truly set the stage for greatness. In a twist of fate that would elevate both men's careers, the cousins found themselves on opposite sides of the ring. Their feud captivated Calgary audiences, showcasing their newfound technical prowess and intensity. The program reached its climax when Smith emerged victorious, claiming the prestigious Stampede British Commonwealth Mid-Heavyweight Championship. a title that carried significant weight in the territory's hierarchy. The victory wasn't just about the gold around Smith's waist. It was proof that the dungeon's baptism by fire had transformed these raw talents into polished gems. Every submission learned under Stu's tutelage, every grueling training session, had contributed to creating wrestlers who could not only survive in the demanding world of professional wrestling, but thrive in it. A fateful tour to Japan would add another deadly dimension to Smith's arsenal, the hard-hitting strong style that would later become his signature. But it was the reformation of his partnership with the Dynamite Kid that would change wrestling history. Now calling themselves the British Bulldogs, they terrorized rings across 2 continents, leaving a trail of broken opponents and stolen shows in their wake. Their reputation grew so large it couldn't be contained in Canada or Japan. In 1984, as Vince McMahon was executing his master plan for national expansion, he knew he needed the most explosive talent available. The British Bulldogs were at the top of his list. When McMahon acquired Stampede Wrestling that same year, the Bulldogs signing with WWF wasn't just another contract. It was a statement of intent. Inside the squared circle, they were poetry in motion, a perfect fusion of styles that few teams could match. The Dynamite Kid was a human highlight reel, pioneering a high-flying style that defied gravity and logic in equal measure. Meanwhile, Davey Boy served as the team's powerhouse anchor, his raw strength and surprising agility creating a foundation that allowed his partner to take even greater risks. But while Smith's professional life soared, his personal life was blossoming in equally meaningful ways. Love had found him in the Hart family dynasty, leading to marriage with Diana Hart, Stu's daughter. Their union would produce 2 children, Harry and Georgia, adding new chapters to both the Hart and Smith wrestling legacies. This personal happiness seemed to fuel Smith's in-ring success, creating a period where everything in his life was clicking into place like perfectly executed moves in a championship match. The British Bulldogs weren't just another tag team in WWF's growing roster. They were revolutionaries who would help redefine what tag team wrestling could be, bringing a hybrid style that combined British technical wrestling, Japanese strong style, and North American showmanship in ways audiences had never seen before. Wrestling rings across America were about to witness a revolution in tag team action, starting with a deeply personal rivalry. The British Bulldogs locked horns with their former Stampede stablemates, the Hart Foundation, comprised of Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Smith's brother-in-law, Bret the Hitman Hart. Their matches became instant classics, proving that even on a roster stacked with larger-than-life figures like Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, and Andre the Giant, technical wrestling excellence could steal the spotlight. But it was their feud with Greg the Hammer Valentine and Brutus Beefcake that would write their names in wrestling history. At WrestleMania 2, in a match that showcased the Bulldogs' unique blend of power and innovation, they captured the WWF Tag Team Championships. What followed was a 9-month reign of dominance, where their combination of Dynamite's aerial assault and Davey Boy's raw power proved unbeatable against all challengers. Their championship story would come full circle in January 1987, when the Hart Foundation finally managed to dethrone them in a match that demonstrated just how far all 4 men had come since their Stampede days. Though no longer champions, the Bulldogs remained a force in the tag division, engaging in memorable programs with teams like the Islanders, the Rougeau brothers, and the imposing Demolition. During this period, the Bulldogs added an unexpected element to their presentation, a real-life English bulldog named Matilda. More than just a mascot, Matilda became an integral part of their character, drawing massive cheers from crowds and adding a unique dimension to their feuds. Some teams would target the beloved canine to get under the Bulldog's skin, leading to heated rivalries that transcended typical wrestling storylines. This era marked a perfect fusion of in-ring excellence and character work, as the Bulldogs proved that technical prowess and crowd connection weren't mutually exclusive. Their matches during this period would influence tag team wrestling for generations to come, setting a standard for what 2 talented performers could achieve when given the freedom to showcase their abilities. The Dream Team's time in WWF would come to an abrupt end in 1988, driven by escalating tensions between the volatile Dynamite Kid and the Rougeau brothers backstage. Despite Billington's growing reputation as a troublemaker, Smith's loyalty to his cousin led him to follow when they departed, taking their talents to All Japan Pro Wrestling and a resurgent Stampede Wrestling. For 2 years, the Bulldogs continued crafting mat classics across the Pacific, facing off against legendary teams like the Malenkos, the Nasty Boys, and the dynamic Japanese duo of Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. Each match showcased why they were considered one of wrestling's most innovative partnerships, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Billington's personal demons were creating an increasingly toxic situation, poisoning not just their professional relationship, but their family bonds as well. The breaking point finally came when Smith made the difficult decision to forge his own path, securing the British Bulldog trademark for himself, a business move that would drive the final wedge between the cousins. October 1990 marked a pivotal moment in Smith's career as he returned to the WWF, now simply known as the British Bulldog. Gone was the tag team specialist. In his place stood a reimagined powerhouse, ready to make his mark as a singles competitor. This transformation wasn't just a change in name or presentation. It was Smith's declaration of independence, stepping out of the shadow of both his cousin and their celebrated tag team legacy. The split would prove prophetic. While Smith was about to enter the most successful phase of his career, Billington's path would take a darker turn, illustrating how two men who once moved in perfect synchronization could end up on such drastically different trajectories. From his first singles match, the British Bulldog unleashed a new intensity in WWF, demolishing opponents like the Warlord, Haku, and even the technically superior Mr. Perfect. His combination of raw power and surprising agility quickly won over crowds, but nowhere was his popularity more explosive than in his native United Kingdom. As WWF's American attendance began to soften, they discovered a goldmine in British wrestling fans who had found their new hero. Capitalizing on this phenomenon, WWF ventured to British soil with groundbreaking shows like UK Rampage and Battle Royal at the Albert Hall. Each appearance by Smith felt like a homecoming, with his victory over the Berserker at Rampage and his triumph in the Albert Hall Battle Royal sending crowds into a frenzy. These successes were just a prelude to what would become one of wrestling's most memorable moments. In 1992, WWF made a historic decision. SummerSlam, Vince McMahon arranged for the British Bulldog to challenge his brother-in-law, Bret the Hitman Hart, for the prestigious Intercontinental Championship. The anticipation was electric. Wembley Stadium swelled with 80,000 passionate fans, the largest legitimate crowd WWF had ever drawn at that point. But this wasn't just about numbers. It was about a perfect storm of circumstances. A hometown hero, a family rivalry, a prestigious title, and the biggest stage British wrestling had ever seen. The match that would follow wouldn't just meet expectations, it would exceed them in ways nobody could have predicted. The tension between these brothers-in-law, both products of the Hart Dungeon, had been building for months. Each man knew the other's moves intimately, Hart with his technical precision, Bulldog with his explosive power. As they prepared to step through the curtain at Wembley, both men knew this wasn't just another match, it was a chance to make history. Behind the glittering lights of Wembley Stadium lurked a darker reality. In the days leading up to the biggest match of his career, Smith spiraled into a drug-fueled binge with Jim Neidhart that left him unable to remember the planned sequence of events. The demons that had haunted his former partner Dynamite Kid had found their way to Smith, whose own substance abuse issues were beginning to overshadow his incredible athletic gifts. But sometimes wrestling magic happens in spite of the circumstances. Bret Hart, ever the consummate professional, orchestrated a masterpiece that night. Like a wrestling puppet master, he guided Smith through what would become one of the greatest matches in WWF history. The electricity in Wembley Stadium reached fever pitch as the two brothers-in-law wove a tale of technical brilliance, power moves, and near falls that had 80,000 fans holding their breath with every count. When Smith finally secured the victory and the Intercontinental Championship, it seemed like a coronation, the moment a new superstar was born. The image of him celebrating with his sister Diana and a tearful Bret became an iconic moment in wrestling history. But sometimes the brightest flames burn fastest. Instead of launching Smith to superstardom, His championship reign fizzled. The same issues that had nearly derailed his Wembley performance continued to haunt him. By November, he would drop the title to a rising Shawn Michaels, but worse was to come. In a devastating turn of events, WWF was forced to release Smith after he was caught receiving shipments of human growth hormone in the mail, a scandal that threatened to end his career just as it was reaching new heights. The fall from Wembley's heights to unemployment was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change in professional wrestling, especially when personal demons entered the ring alongside the athletes. Just as Smith hit rock bottom, a turn of events would force him to reinvent himself once again. In the midst of Vince McMahon's highly publicized steroid trial, WWF couldn't risk any further scandals, leaving their former champion to seek opportunities elsewhere. His journey would take him through the indies of Eastern Championship Wrestling and back to the familiar rings of All Japan before landing in World Championship Wrestling in 1993. In WCW, Smith found himself aligned with the franchise player Sting, a partnership that seemed to promise great things. His powerhouse style matched up perfectly against monsters like Sid Vicious and Big Van Vader, with one match against the latter even appearing to crown Smith as the new WCW World Champion. But in classic wrestling politics fashion, a dusty finish, named after Booker Dusty Rhodes' tendency to reverse dramatic victories, saw the title stripped away as quickly as it had been won. Just as his career seemed to be stabilizing, Smith's personal life threw another curveball. A bar fight with someone allegedly making advances toward Diana proved to be the final straw for WCW management. Once again, the British Bulldog found himself without a major platform for his talents. His next stop would be a humbling return to his roots in the UK's All-Star Wrestling, trading holds with local talents like Jimmy Ocean and Drew McDonald, a far cry from the packed stadiums and World Championship matches of just months before. This period served as a stark reminder of wrestling's volatile nature, where success could be as fleeting as a 3 count. The same explosive power and charisma that had once electrified Wembley Stadium was now being displayed in small British venues, showing just how quickly fortunes could change in the unforgiving world of professional wrestling. In the summer of 1994, an unexpected olive branch from WWF gave Smith another chance at the big time. Making his return at SummerSlam, he appeared during the explosive steel cage match between the warring Hart brothers, Bret and Owen. The Hart family drama had reached a boiling point, and Smith made his allegiance clear, standing firmly beside his brother-in-law Bret. This reunion led to a series of hard-hitting tag team matches, with the Bulldog and Hitman facing off against the unlikely alliance of Owen Hart and Jim Neidhart. As the family feud cooled, Smith's ambitions turned toward wrestling's ultimate prize, the WWF Championship. After coming up short against Bob Backlund in late 1994, he set his sights on the 1995 Royal Rumble, seeing it as his ticket to WrestleMania's main event. The night proved to be both epic and heartbreaking for Smith. Entering at number 2, he demonstrated incredible endurance by lasting until the very end, only to have his dreams shattered when number 1 entrant Shawn Michaels eliminated him last. With his world title aspirations temporarily derailed, WWF Creative had a unique idea to keep Smith in the spotlight. They paired him with the All-American Lex Luger to form the Allied Powers, a team meant to symbolize the unity between Britain and America. The concept seemed promising on paper, 2 of wrestling's strongest powerhouses joining forces to dominate the tag team division. This new direction marked yet another reinvention for Smith, showing his adaptability in an ever-changing wrestling landscape. The Allied Powers represented more than just another tag team. It was an attempt to capitalize on both men's popularity in their respective home countries while giving them a fresh direction after their individual main event pursuits had stalled. In what should have been a dominant force, the Allied Powers never quite found their footing in WWF's tag team ranks. Their pay-per-view appearances were limited to a victory over the Blue Brothers at WrestleMania and a failed bid to capture the tag team championships from Owen Hart and Yokozuna at In Your House 2. The partnership crumbled when Luger abruptly departed for WCW, leaving Smith to navigate the waters alone once again. His singles career hit a series of frustrating roadblocks, falling short against Diesel at In Your House 4, and his brother-in-law Brett at In Your House 5. With momentum stalling, Smith made a shocking decision, aligning himself with Jim Cornette's stable alongside Owen Hart. While the group boasted imposing figures like Yokozuna and Vader, it was the partnership between Smith and Owen that truly shined, their natural chemistry and family connection creating tag team magic. Yet Smith's hunger for singles glory never dimmed. May 1996's In Your House. Beware of Dog saw him push Shawn Michaels to the limit in a WWF Championship match that ended in a controversial draw. The inconclusive finish led to a rematch at King of the Ring, the same historic night that gave birth to Austin 3:16. But even on this pivotal evening in wrestling history, Smith's quest for the company's top prize would end in disappointment. These setbacks painted a portrait of a wrestler who could consistently reach the summit but never quite plant his flag at the absolute peak. The British Bulldog's ability to seamlessly transition between singles and tag team excellence showed his versatility, but the ultimate prize remained frustratingly out of reach. Behind the scenes, a reality was settling in. While Vince McMahon viewed Smith as a reliable main event player, he didn't see him as the guy to carry the company's top prize. Rather than let this derail him, Smith channeled his energy into tag team excellence, reuniting with Owen Hart to capture the tag team championships from the Smoking Guns in a memorable victory. The duo proved themselves worthy champions, successfully defending against powerhouse teams like the Legion of Doom and the unlikely pairing of Vader and Mankind. But 1997 would finally see McMahon reward Smith's loyalty and consistency. In February, he and Owen delivered a technical masterpiece in the tournament finals, with Smith emerging as the first ever European champion, a title that seemed tailor-made for the British powerhouse. This triumph would lead to an even bigger opportunity when Bret Hart assembled a new version of the Hart Foundation. Bringing together Bret, Owen, Jim Neidhart, Brian Pillman, and Smith, the stable revolutionized wrestling storytelling through the Canada versus America angle. This unique narrative twist saw the group play heroes in Canada and Europe while serving as villains in the United States. A nuanced approach to wrestling psychology that was years ahead of its time. The reformed Hart Foundation became one of WWF's most compelling acts, with Smith playing a crucial role in their success. This period demonstrated wrestling's ability to blur the lines between good and evil, with audience reaction determined not by traditional face-heel dynamics, but by national pride and loyalty. The Bulldog's presence added international credibility to the stable, expanding its appeal beyond North American borders and helping create one of the most memorable storylines of the 1990s. As the Hart Foundation's popularity soared in Canada, Smith found himself riding a wave of success, successfully defending his European championship against legitimate tough guys like Ken Shamrock. However, a moment that should have been his crowning achievement turned bitter at the UK-exclusive pay-per-view, One Night Only, on September 20th. In what was meant to be a touching tribute to his cancer-stricken sister Tracy at ringside, Smith was scheduled to retain his title against Shawn Michaels. But wrestling's behind-the-scenes politics would rear its ugly head. Michaels, wielding his considerable backstage influence, had the finish changed so he would emerge victorious instead. The decision left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Here was Smith, in his homeland, dedicating the match to his dying sister, only to have his moment stolen by backstage maneuvering. This incident only intensified the growing real-life animosity between HBK and the Hart family. The tension would reach its breaking point at the now infamous Survivor Series on November 9, 1997. The Montreal Screwjob didn't just change wrestling history, it shattered the Hart Foundation forever. Watching his brother-in-law Bret Hart get deceived in such a public manner, Smith made an immediate decision. Standing in solidarity with his family, he walked out of WWF alongside Bret and Jim Neidhart, making the jump to WCW. This exodus marked the end of an era. The Hart Foundation, one of wrestling's most compelling stables, was torn apart not by storyline betrayal, but by real-world business decisions. Smith's departure showed that sometimes blood and loyalty run thicker than business, even in the cutthroat world of professional wrestling. In 1998, Smith's once impressive physique had become a liability, his steroid use leaving him bloated and limited in the ring. His WCW run reflected this decline, relegated to undercard matches with Neidhart until a devastating accident in September changed everything. During a match, Smith took a brutal bump onto a concealed trapdoor, meant for Ultimate Warrior's dramatic entrance, that nobody had warned him about. The impact was catastrophic. What followed was a nightmare scenario that exposed wrestling's darker side. While Smith lay injured, Eric Bischoff fired him, believing he was exaggerating his condition. The reality was far more serious. Smith developed a spinal infection during recovery that nearly left him paralyzed. The physical pain drove him deeper into drug dependency, creating a vicious cycle that would follow him back to WWF in 1999. His return to WWF saw a stripped-down version of the British Bulldog. Gone were the iconic Union Jack tights, replaced by plain jeans. Even his signature Rule Britannia theme music was taken away. This repackaging, combined with his physical limitations and ongoing substance issues, left Smith a shadow of his former self. In an era defined by larger-than-life attitude-era personalities, he found himself losing to stars like The Rock before being demoted to the now devalued European Championship division. The transformation was jarring for longtime fans. The same wrestler who had once electrified Wembley Stadium was now struggling to keep up with the faster-paced style of the late 90s. His body, battered by years of abuse both in and out of the ring, simply couldn't deliver the power moves that had once made him special. This period served as a stark reminder of wrestling's physical toll and the dangerous spiral that could occur when injuries and addiction intersected. After years of setbacks, Smith managed one final moment of glory, capturing his old European Championship from D'Lo Brown on SmackDown in October 1999. But this victory was merely a brief flicker of his former brilliance. He drifted into the chaotic hardcore division, his once precise power moves replaced by brawling and weapon shots, until WWF was forced to release him in May 2000 after he arrived at an event clearly unfit to perform. As his professional life crumbled, his personal world shattered alongside it. His marriage to Diana Hart disintegrated amid shocking rumors of infidelity involving top WWF stars Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin. The divorce in 2000 marked the end of his connection to the legendary Hart family that had given him both his greatest triumphs and deepest sorrows. Hitting rock bottom forced Smith to confront his demons. He checked into an Atlanta rehabilitation clinic to battle his dependency on prescription painkillers, an addiction that had spiraled out of control following his 1998 back injury. A disturbing arrest for allegedly threatening Diana and her sister Ellie served as his wake-up call. With remarkable determination, Smith committed to getting clean, purging all medications from his system. Just as it seemed Smith had conquered his personal battles and was preparing for one last WWE run, tragedy struck. On May 18, 2002, while vacationing in British Columbia with his girlfriend, the British Bulldog suffered a fatal heart attack at just 39 years old. Though he had achieved sobriety, years of substance abuse had taken their toll. In 2020, WWE finally recognized his contributions with a Hall of Fame induction. In a touching moment that bridged generations, his son Harry brought Buffy, granddaughter of Smith's beloved mascot Matilda, to the ceremony. Up next, Paul Orndorff. Paul Orndorff was one of Hulk Hogan's greatest rivals during the Golden Era. He went from being a standout football player to becoming Mr. Wonderful, the man who headlined the first WrestleMania. But after years of sacrifices and concussions, the effects of CTE would take their toll on Mr. Wonderful. And in 2021, doctors gave Paul devastating news. His time was running out. In 1949, Paul Parlett Orndorff Jr. was born in Brandon, Florida. The Orndorff were a working-class family. Every dollar came from hard work and long hours, something young Paul learned early on. While other kids in Brandon might have dreamed of easy success, Paul's childhood taught him that nothing comes without effort. Picture Tampa in the 1950s and 60s, hot summer days and Friday night lights. But the star who would later dominate wrestling rings started as the smallest kid on the block. Young Paul Orndorff wasn't born with natural size or strength, but he had something more powerful: pure grit that ran bone deep. When Paul first stepped onto a football field, it wasn't just about playing a game. He'd be the first to arrive at practice and the last to leave, turning the Florida sun into his personal training partner. While his classmates saw practice as something to get through, Orndorff saw it as something serious. He attacked the weight room like a man possessed, treating every rep like it was his last. Teachers and coaches would often find him running extra drills alone, long after everyone else had gone home. The other players started noticing something different about Paul. He was smaller, but he hit harder, ran faster, and simply wanted it more than anyone else. The New Orleans Saints picked Paul Orndorff in the 1973 NFL Draft. The Saints thought they had found a player who could do it all. But Paul was starting to hear the call of the wrestling ring, even as he practiced with the NFL. The path wasn't straightforward. He tried playing for the Chicago Bears, but things didn't click. When he got hurt playing in the World Football League, some might have seen it as bad luck. But really, these setbacks were just pushing Paul toward what he was meant to do. Everything changed when his father-in-law helped him get into wrestling. In 1976, fans at Mid-Southern Wrestling saw Paul for the first time. He didn't start small. He went right after the biggest name there, Jerry Lawler. It was like lighting a fire in the arena, and Paul knew he had found his place. Just a year later, in 1977, Paul was already wearing championship gold. Winning the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship showed everyone that he wasn't just some football player trying to wrestle. He was a natural star. When he moved to wrestle in the tri-state area, he found himself fighting the mighty Ernie Ladd. They had amazing matches, and Paul even won the North American Heavyweight title twice. What made Paul special wasn't just that he could wrestle, it was how fast he got good at it. While most new wrestlers took years to learn, Paul seemed to know what to do right away. He wasn't just good at wrestling, he was changing it, helping create a new era in the sport that would last for years to come. In his early wrestling days, Paul became a star in the National Wrestling Alliance. His fights with the masked superstar were so fierce, people started calling him the Brandon Bull, remembering his football days. By 1979, he was on top of the world, winning the World Tag Team titles with Jimmy Snuka. He kept winning in Southeast Championship Wrestling too, taking tag team gold with partners Dick Slater and Norville Austin. The year 1980 saw Paul make Mid-South territory his home, and that's where he really caught fire. He had a wild rivalry with Ken Mantell that ended with someone losing their hair. Then he shocked everyone by turning bad after Jake the Snake Roberts won the North American title that Paul wanted so badly. But Paul got his way in the end. On July 4th, 1981, he won that title himself. His time as champion wasn't quiet. He fought some of the biggest names around. The $1 Million Man and Dusty Rhodes gave him some of his toughest fights. But it all went south when his friend Bob Roop stabbed him in the back. Their friendship turned into one of the nastiest fights in Mid-South, and by early 1982, Paul had had enough. He packed his bags and left Mid-South behind, ready for something bigger. The thing about Paul was that he didn't just wrestle matches. He told stories in the ring. Every fight meant something. Every title had a purpose. When he was a good guy, fans loved him. When he turned bad, they hated him just as much. He could make people feel something just by walking into the arena. His matches with the $1 Million Man weren't just wrestling. They were like watching a movie where you didn't know who would win. Those years taught Paul everything he needed to know about being a star. He learned how to work a crowd, how to make people care, and most importantly, how to leave them wanting more. Each territory he wrestled in made him better, smarter, and more ready for the bright lights that were coming his way. Little did anyone know, but Paul Orndorff was just getting started. Paul's return to Georgia Championship Wrestling lit up the whole territory. His fights with Buzz Sawyer were so intense that when he finally won the National Heavyweight Championship, the fans went wild. He even gave up the title for a shot at Ric Flair's World Championship. That's how badly he wanted to be the best. When that didn't work out, Paul came back for his old title. He had crazy matches with the Super Destroyer and the Masked Superstar, trading the belt back and forth. But then Larry Zbyszko played dirty, using Killer Tim Brooks in a sneaky plan that cost Paul his championship. Looking for new fights and bigger crowds, Paul headed to Japan in 1983. There, he took on the best wrestlers Japan had. guys like Riki Choshu and the legendary Antonio Inoki. He even teamed up with the giant Big John Studd, making quite a name for himself overseas. Then came the moment that would change everything. Paul walked into the World Wrestling Federation. But he wasn't just another new guy trying his luck. He was Mr. Wonderful now, full of confidence and swagger. On January 23, 1984, he stepped into Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in wrestling, and beat Salvatore Bellomo. Just like that, Paul Orndorff was a main event star. What made this time special wasn't just the wins, it was how Paul carried himself. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He had become something larger than life. Every time he walked to the ring, fans knew they were seeing someone special. The way he moved, talked, and fought, it all screamed superstar. That first match at the Garden wasn't just a win. It was Paul Orndorff announcing to the world that he had arrived at the top of wrestling, and he wasn't going anywhere. When Paul stepped into the WWF ring, he wasn't just wrestling. He was putting on a show. Every move he made told a story, and when he grabbed the microphone, people couldn't look away. His biggest early story came when he teamed up with Rowdy Roddy Piper, and that's where everything changed. It was Piper who first called him Mr. Wonderful, a name that would stick forever. Together, they weren't just bad guys. They were the kind of villains that fans secretly loved, even while booing them. Then came the big one, a match that would change wrestling forever. Paul and Piper took on the biggest stars around, the famous actor Mr. T and the mighty Hulk Hogan at the very first WrestleMania. This wasn't just another wrestling match in some small town. This was Hollywood meets wrestling, with celebrities everywhere and millions watching. Wrestling was growing up, becoming something bigger than it had ever been before. Every time Paul and Piper showed up, they got under people's skin in the best way. They weren't just wrestlers being mean, they were artists playing their parts perfectly. When they walked down the aisle at WrestleMania, they knew they were part of something special. This match wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about showing the world that wrestling could be as big as any other entertainment. What made Paul and Piper so good together was how real they felt. While Hogan and Mr. T were like superheroes, Paul and Piper were like the cool bad guys in a movie. They dressed sharp, talked smart, and made people want to see them get beaten up, but also secretly hoped they'd show up again next week. They weren't just wrestling bad guys anymore. They were helping turn wrestling into the huge show business it would become. That first WrestleMania match helped change everything about wrestling. It brought in new fans, made wrestling cool, and showed that a wrestling show could be as big as any movie or concert. And right in the middle of it all was Paul Orndorff, playing his part perfectly as Mr. Wonderful, helping turn wrestling into something wonderful indeed. The famous WrestleMania match came down to one wild moment. Bob Orton, who was supposed to help Paul win, messed everything up. He tried to hit Hogan with his cast but hit Paul instead. That one mistake let Hogan pin Paul for the win, and everything fell apart after that. Paul was burning mad about losing, but things got even worse. On Saturday night's main event, one of wrestling's biggest TV shows back then, Piper and Orton turned on him. They jumped him and beat him down, thinking they'd taught him a lesson. But they didn't know Paul Orndorff very well. Because later that same night, when they were beating up Hulk Hogan 2-on-1, something amazing happened. The crowd went crazy when Paul's music hit. He ran to the ring like a man on fire, but this time he wasn't after Hogan. He was coming to save him. Nobody could believe their eyes. The man who had been one of wrestling's biggest bad guys was now standing side by side with its biggest hero. The fans went wild, and just like that, Mr. Wonderful had gone from villain to hero in one unforgettable night. This wasn't just another wrestling story. It was like watching someone change right before your eyes. One minute, Paul was the guy everyone hated. The next, he was the guy they couldn't stop cheering for. The way he ran down that aisle, the look in his eyes, the way he fought off his old friends. It all felt real. Because with Paul Orndorff, even when the story was bigger than life, he made you believe every second of it. That night showed what made Paul special. He could make you hate him one minute and cheer him the next, and both felt just as real. His switch from bad guy to good guy wasn't just another wrestling turn. It was the start of one of the biggest stories wrestling would ever tell. When Paul finally broke away from Bobby Heenan, Everyone knew things were really changing. It wasn't just another wrestling moment. Paul had picked his side, and he was sticking with it. Now he was fighting alongside Hulk Hogan, the biggest good guy in wrestling, and fans couldn't get enough. Paul and Hogan became an unstoppable team, traveling all over America to fight Piper and Orton. Every city they visited turned into a battleground. While Hogan had to defend his championship against other challengers, Paul took it upon himself to handle both Piper and Orton one-on-one. These weren't just normal matches, they were all-out wars that often ended with both guys still wanting to fight more. The fans who used to hate Paul now couldn't cheer loud enough for him. Every time he hit his finishing move, the piledriver, the buildings would shake with excitement. What made these fights special wasn't just who won or lost, it was how personal everything felt. When Paul fought Piper or Orton, you could feel the bad blood between them. These weren't just wrestlers doing moves, they were telling stories of betrayal and revenge. Night after night, city after city, Paul proved he belonged at the top of wrestling. He wasn't just Hogan's friend, he was a star in his own right. The way he carried himself had changed too. Instead of bragging about being Mr. Wonderful, he was showing it in the ring. He still had that swagger, but now he was using it to fire up the crowd instead of making them angry. This time in Paul's career showed just how good he really was. He could fight the biggest names in wrestling and look like he belonged. Whether he was teaming with Hogan or fighting on his own, Paul Orndorff had become one of wrestling's most popular stars, and he did it by being exactly who he was: wonderful. When Paul fired Bobby Heenan, he made a dangerous enemy. Heenan was so mad he offered $25,000 to anyone who could take Paul out. When nobody could do it, he doubled it to $50,000. That's when wrestling legend Bruno Sammartino stepped in as a referee to keep things fair. But when Piper and Orton started picking fights with Bruno too, he joined forces with Paul, making their battles even bigger. Paul wasn't just fighting Heenan's guys, he was also teaming up with the massive Andre the Giant and taking on tough guys like Don Morocco. But something else was eating at Paul. People started calling him Hulk Jr. Adrian Adonis kept making fun of him, saying he'd gone soft since becoming Hogan's friend. The breaking point came when Paul tried to call Hogan on TV, but Hogan was too busy training to talk. Paul started acting different after that. When he and Hogan were supposed to fight the Moondogs together, Paul wanted to prove he could do it alone. He didn't need Hogan's help. Then came the match that changed everything. Fighting Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy, Paul and Hogan bumped into each other. Paul got hurt and had to leave for a while. When he came back, nobody knew what to expect. Paul walked down to the ring like nothing had changed. Then, in a moment nobody will ever forget, he turned on Hogan. One big clothesline and then his famous piledriver. Just like that, Paul Orndorff had shocked the wrestling world. All those people calling him Hulk Jr. had finally pushed him too far. That moment wasn't just about Paul turning heel again. It was about him standing up and saying he was his own man. He didn't need to be Hogan's friend to be a star. He was Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and he was done living in anybody's shadow. The way he did it, the surprise, the violence, the perfect timing, showed why Paul was one of the best at telling stories in the ring. Paul's fights with Hulk Hogan weren't just wrestling matches. They were some of the best stories ever told in the ring. While Hogan was the all-American hero in his red and yellow, telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, Paul was showing a different side of success. He was the guy who thought he was better than everyone else and wasn't afraid to prove it. When these two fought, it felt personal. It wasn't just about who was stronger, it was about Paul being sick of living in Hogan's shadow. Every time they locked up, you could feel years of built-up anger coming out. Paul wanted to prove he didn't need Hogan's friendship to be a star. He wanted to show that Mr. Wonderful was every bit as good as the mighty Hulk Hogan. Their matches told a story that any fan could understand: jealousy, betrayal, and pride. When Paul hit Hogan with that clothesline and piledriver, it wasn't just another wrestling move. It was him saying, "I'm not your sidekick anymore." The fans who used to cheer both men now had to pick sides, and the buildings would shake with boos and cheers whenever they fought. What made these matches special was how real they felt. Every punch, every move, every time they stared each other down, you could feel the heat between them. Paul wasn't just another bad guy for Hogan to beat. He was someone who knew all Hogan's moves, who had fought beside him, and now wanted to prove he could beat him. This wasn't just good guy versus bad guy. It was about two of the biggest stars in wrestling going all out to prove who was better. Paul showed that being wonderful didn't mean being nice. It meant being the best, no matter who you had to beat to prove it. Their rivalry became one of wrestling's greatest stories because both men made you believe every second of it. The year 1986 marked a big change in how Paul showed up in the ring. He wasn't just a simple bad guy anymore. He became something more interesting. Some nights he'd be the villain everyone hated, other nights he'd be the tough guy. Fans couldn't help but cheer for. This was new for wrestling back then, when most wrestlers were either pure good guys or pure bad guys. Paul started doing things that made fans think twice about booing him. Even when he was being mean, he had his reasons that made sense. When he'd grab the microphone, he wouldn't just yell about how great he was. He'd tell the crowd why he did what he did. He made people understand him, even if they didn't agree with him. In the ring, every match was like watching a different chapter of Paul's story. Sometimes he'd cheat to win and act proud of it. Other times he'd fight fair and tough, showing he could beat anyone straight up if he wanted to. The way he carried himself, that Mr. Wonderful swagger, stayed the same. But now it meant different things at different times. This made his matches more exciting because you never knew which Paul would show up. He might be the sneaky villain one week, then the misunderstood tough guy the next. Each fight felt different from the last, but they all fit together in the bigger story of who Paul Orndorff was becoming. What made this so special was how ahead of its time it was. While other wrestlers were stuck playing the same character every night, Paul was showing that wrestling could be more like a TV show, with characters that changed and grew. He wasn't just wrestling matches anymore. He was helping change how wrestling told its stories. The late 1980s brought Paul his toughest fight yet, but this time it wasn't in the ring. A bad neck injury had him facing something every wrestler fears: the end of their career. For a guy who built his life around being physically perfect, this hit especially hard. Some thought Mr. Wonderful might be done for good. But Paul tackled rehab the same way he tackled everything else, with pure determination. The same drive that got him through football practice in Tampa, that pushed him to become a wrestling champion, now went into healing his body. Every day was like training for the biggest match of his life, except his opponent was his own injury. When he came back to wrestling, fans saw something different in him. Sure, he was still Mr. Wonderful, still had that confident strut to the ring, but now there was something more. He was proving that nothing could keep him down. Every move he made told the crowd, "I'm still here. I'm still strong." His matches became more than just fights. They were proof that you could bounce back from anything. The way Paul fought through his injury inspired other wrestlers too. Here was one of the toughest guys in the business, showing that even the biggest stars could get hurt, but also showing how to fight back. Even with a bad neck, Paul kept pushing forward. He changed how he wrestled to protect himself, but never lost that fire that made him special. As the 1990s rolled in, wrestling wasn't the same business Paul had started in. The WWF was becoming huge, like a TV show that played all over the world. So Paul headed back to WCW, where he could still be Mr. Wonderful his way. He got into some hard-hitting fights with wild men like Cactus Jack and battled young stars like Dustin Rhodes, showing he could still go with anybody. But Paul was more than just another wrestler now. He was living history. He was one of the last guys around who knew what it was like when wrestling was split into territories, when you had to drive town to town making your name. He'd been there when wrestling was changing from a local attraction into something that played on TV screens worldwide. When fans watched Paul wrestle in the 90s, they weren't just seeing another match. They were watching someone who helped build the wrestling business they now loved. In his matches with younger stars, Paul wasn't just trying to win. He was teaching them what he'd learned over the years. Every hold, every move, every way he worked the crowd came from years of experience. The new guys might have been faster or flashier, but Paul knew things about wrestling that you can only learn the hard way, night after night in rings across the country. Paul Orndorff was like a walking wrestling history book, someone who'd seen it all, done it all, and could still show the young guys how it was done. In 2011, Paul faced his toughest fight yet when doctors told him he had throat cancer. They didn't give him much time, just days to live. Even with a feeding tube keeping him alive, Paul wasn't ready to give up. Just like all those times in the ring, he refused to stay down. When he announced in August that his cancer was gone, it seemed like Mr. Wonderful had pulled off one last amazing comeback. But some battles can't be won with just heart and determination. Over the years that followed, Paul started fighting dementia, a fight that slowly takes away who you are, bit by bit. In 2021, a surprising story unfolded about Paul Orndorff that showed how even wrestling's biggest stars could fall on hard times. It started simply enough. A fan shared a GoFundMe page on Turnbuckle Magazine's Facebook. The page had been set up by Paul's son Travis, asking for help with his father's medical bills. The news shocked many wrestling fans. Paul Orndorff had been a main event star in the 1980s, fighting in the biggest matches and biggest arenas. He'd headlined shows with Hulk Hogan when wrestling was exploding in popularity. If you'd asked fans back then to guess which wrestlers might need financial help later in life, almost nobody would have picked Mr. Wonderful. But this showed a harsh truth about wrestling in those days. Even though Paul had been on top, even though he'd helped make wrestling huge, the money didn't last forever. Medical bills, especially for aging wrestlers whose bodies had taken years of punishment, could eat through savings quickly. The same man who once fought in front of thousands now needed help from those same fans in a different way. Fans started sharing Travis's GoFundMe everywhere. The wrestling community, known for taking care of its own, began spreading the word. This wasn't just about helping an old wrestler. This was about helping Mr. Wonderful, someone who'd given his body and his health to entertain fans for years. The campaign showed how wrestling had changed too. In the old days, when a wrestler needed help, it would happen quietly, maybe through other wrestlers or small fan clubs. But social media let Travis reach out to wrestling fans everywhere, showing them that even someone as wonderful as his dad could need their help sometimes. When the GoFundMe campaign details came out, they painted a heartbreaking picture. Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful himself, was 3 years behind on his property taxes and needed help buying medicine. Even worse, if he couldn't pay those taxes by September, he'd lose his home to the bank. Many fans couldn't believe it at first. Paul was known for being smart with his money, not someone who'd waste the millions he made wrestling. But then the real story came out through Brian, who explained what had drained Paul's savings. It wasn't bad spending or poor choices. It was the brutal cost of fighting stage 4 lymph node cancer. The same toughness that made Paul a wrestling star had helped him beat cancer against the odds. But the medical bills had taken everything he had. This was more than just another sad wrestling story. Here was a man who'd done everything right, saved his money, invested wisely, planned for the future. But cancer didn't care about any of that. The cost of staying alive had eaten through savings that should have lasted a lifetime. The same Paul Orndorff, who once main evented WrestleMania, was now at risk of losing his home. The situation showed a harsh truth about life in America. Even being a smart, successful star didn't protect you from medical bills that could take everything. The man who'd helped make wrestling a million-dollar business was finding out that in the real world, even millions might not be enough when serious illness strikes. For fans, this wasn't just about helping an old wrestler anymore. It was about helping someone who'd been smart with his money but got hit with something nobody could really prepare for. Mr. Wonderful needed help. Not because he'd failed, but because sometimes life throws something at you that's tougher than any opponent in the ring. The wrestling world jumped into action as soon as they heard about Paul's situation. Social media lit up with shares and retweets. Big names in wrestling like Hurricane Helms, Gerald Briscoe, and Rip Rogers helped spread the word. It wasn't just talk. People were opening their wallets to help Mr. Wonderful. The campaign that had only raised $640 suddenly took off like a rocket. Over 200 people stepped up to donate, most of them being regular fans who remembered Paul's matches. But some of wrestling's biggest stars pitched in too. Dallas Page, known for helping other wrestlers in need, contributed. Chris Jericho, one of modern wrestling's biggest stars, showed up to help. Even Afa Anoa'i from the legendary Samoan wrestling family joined in. What happened next was like something out of a feel-good movie. In just over 24 hours, fans and wrestlers together blew past the $10,000 goal. It showed something special about wrestling fans. They don't forget the stars who entertain them. Sure, they might boo the bad guys and cheer the good guys during shows, but when one of their heroes needed real help, they came together like family. The speed of it all was amazing. In about a day, they went from Paul possibly losing his home to having enough money to save it. Social media, which can often be a tough place, turned into a rally point for helping someone who'd given so much to wrestling. The same fans who once watched Paul battle Hulk Hogan were now fighting alongside him against a different kind of opponent. This wasn't just fans helping an old wrestler. It was the wrestling community showing what they're really made of. When one of their own needed help, whether they were wonderful or not, the wrestling family stepped up to the plate. When the money came in, the first thing it did was save Paul's home by paying off those back taxes. But the help meant more than just keeping a roof over his head. It also meant Paul could get the medicine he needed as he kept fighting health problems. The cancer he'd beaten had left him with memory issues, and things got even tougher when doctors found signs of CTE, brain damage that many old wrestlers deal with from years of taking hits to the head. Brian Blair, who knew Paul well, shared some bittersweet news about his friend. "He's healthy," Blair said, talking about how amazed everyone was that Paul beat stage 4 cancer when they thought they might lose him. But beating cancer came with a price. It put extra stress on his brain, which was already dealing with damage from all the concussions he'd taken in the ring. The doctors had found something called tau in Paul's brain, a sign that shows up in people with CTE. It explained a lot about his memory problems. But even with these challenges, they weren't giving up. They were working on getting his medicine right, hoping that upping the dose might help his memory, since his body was still strong even if his mind was struggling. It was a tough situation. Here was Paul Orndorff, who'd beaten cancer against all odds, still fighting hard like he always did. His body was winning battles, but his mind was fighting a different kind of match, one caused by all those years of entertaining fans in the ring. The money fans raised wasn't just paying bills, it was giving Mr. Wonderful a chance to keep fighting, to stay in his home, and to get the help he needed for both his body and his mind. The whole thing showed something important. The same tough spirit that made Paul Mr. Wonderful in the ring was still there, still fighting, still refusing to give up, even when the fights got harder and the opponents weren't something you could see in the ring. What started as an emergency effort to save Paul's home turned into something even better. While the GoFundMe money helped pay off what he owed, his family did something really smart. They fought for and won a tax exemption. This wasn't just a quick fix. It was a long-term solution that cut his future property taxes by 75%. This big drop in his tax rate meant the money fans donated would stretch much further than anyone first thought. The funds raised wouldn't just save his home for now. They'd keep Paul's home safe for the next 4 years under this new, lower tax rate. What started as a crisis turned into stable ground for Mr. Wonderful to stand on. The family's work in getting this tax exemption showed the same kind of fighting spirit Paul was famous for. They didn't just solve today's problem. They looked ahead and found a way to make tomorrow better, too. Instead of needing another fundraiser next year, Paul could rest easier knowing his home was secure for years to come. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about giving Paul peace of mind. After all his health battles, after beating cancer and dealing with CTE, at least he wouldn't have to worry about losing his home. The wrestling community hadn't just helped their hero once. Thanks to this tax break, their help would keep protecting Paul for years. The whole story, from the urgent call for help to the long-term solution, showed how the wrestling world takes care of its own. Fans and fellow wrestlers didn't just throw money at a problem. They helped give Mr. Wonderful something wonderful, the security of knowing his home was safe for years to come. But even with all the love and support from fans who rallied to help him keep his home and get his medicine, Paul Orndorff's final battle came to an end on July 12, 2021. He was 71 years old. His last years showed the same fighting spirit that made him a wrestling legend. When cancer tried to take him down, he kicked out at 2.5, just like he'd done so many times in the ring. But dementia was different. It was an opponent that played by its own rules, one that even Mr. Wonderful couldn't overcome. The way Paul fought his health battles touched many people. Other wrestlers talked about how tough he was, fighting cancer when doctors had counted him out. Even in his final years dealing with dementia, He kept that spark that made him special. He might not have been the same Mr. Wonderful who lit up wrestling rings, but his courage never changed. In 2005, wrestling's biggest company gave Paul its highest honor, a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. Up next, Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect is the greatest technical wrestler to ever step in the ring. He captured championships in every major territory, mastered moves no one else could execute, and even became wrestling's first true perfectionist who could excel at any sport he touched. But in 2003, one decision would change everything. And it didn't just end Mr. Perfect's career, it tragically ended his life. In 1958, Curt Hennig was born in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. He was the son of Larry the Axe Hennig, one of the most respected wrestlers in the business, soaking up knowledge that would serve him well in the years to come. Wrestling wasn't just something he watched on TV, it was his family's way of life. Growing up, Curt showed early signs that he was something special. In high school, he could do it all. Football teams wanted him, basketball coaches tried to recruit him, and he made everything look easy. But despite all these offers coming his way, Curt knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. Just like his father before him, the wrestling ring was calling his name. When Curt started training with wrestling legend Verne Gagne, something became clear right away. Curt was a natural in the ring. While most new wrestlers needed months of practice, Curt picked everything up instantly, like he'd been doing it his whole life. Starting out in the AWA in 1980, Curt felt a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Everyone kept comparing him to his dad, Larry the Axe Hennig, one of the toughest wrestlers around. For a young guy just starting out, those were some big boots to fill. That's why in 1981, Curt jumped at the chance to work for Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. The run didn't last long though, as his wife was about to have their first baby. But in that short time, he caught McMahon's eye as someone special. Going back to the AWA turned out to be a smart move. Curt teamed up with a young Scott Hall, and together, they won the tag team titles. They would end up being one of the last great teams in AWA history. But it was when Curt started wrestling on his own that things really took off. In 1987, he hit the biggest moment of his career so far, beating the legendary Nick Bockwinkel to become AWA World Champion. This was huge not just for Curt, but for the whole Hennig family, as even his dad Curt had finally stepped out of his father's shadow. He held that title for over a year, but by the late 1980s, the AWA was in trouble. The company that had been around for decades was starting to fall apart. Lucky for Curt, though, Vince McMahon hadn't forgotten about the talented young wrestler he'd seen years before. As the AWA was heading toward its end, McMahon came calling with an offer that would change everything. When Curt walked back into the WWF in 1988, Vince McMahon could hardly believe how much he'd grown. The young kid who'd briefly worked for him years before had turned into a complete performer. Everyone needed a character, something that would make them stand out from the crowd. That's how Mr. Perfect was born. Looking at Curt's background as a natural athlete who'd excelled at every sport he tried, McMahon knew they had something special on their hands. Yes, they filmed those now famous TV spots showing Mr. Perfect doing amazing things in different sports. Sinking impossible basketball shots, throwing perfect spirals in football, and even bowling perfect games. While some of these needed a few takes to get right, Curt's natural ability meant he could actually do most of these feats himself. Even when he wasn't the one doing the talking, Curt found ways to steal the show. While Flair was cutting one of his famous promos, fans couldn't help but watch Perfect in the background, making faces and reactions that made everything even better. During their time working together, Curt and Rick became close friends, which wasn't surprising given Curt's personality. Behind the scenes, Curt was known as one of the most well-liked guys in the locker room. He was always ready with a joke or a prank to lighten the mood, the kind of person who could make everyone laugh even on their worst days. But while he kept everyone else smiling, Curt was fighting his own battles. His back wasn't getting any better, and he'd started relying more and more on painkillers just to get through the day. Yes, even though he wasn't taking bumps in the ring anymore, the pain from his injuries just wouldn't go away. The 1992 Survivor Series was set to feature a huge tag team match, The Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. But when Warrior suddenly quit the company right before the show, Vince McMahon found himself in a tight spot. After running through his options, each time ever he'd be playing a good guy. But just like everything else in his career, Kurt made it look easy. Fans who'd spent years hating him now found themselves cheering as he sent his old friend Ric Flair packing back to WCW in a loser leaves town match in January '93. After that, he had good feuds with rising stars like Shawn Michaels and Lex Luger. But something was different this time around. The sad truth was that Kurt just couldn't move like he used to, and both he and the fans could see it. By 1996, Vince McMahon was trying to get Mr. Perfect back in the ring one more time. The timing seemed odd, though. Kurt was about to get a $300,000 payout from his insurance deal, money he planned to use for retirement. Then, out of nowhere, Lloyd's of London refused to pay up. Kurt had his suspicions about this, thinking Vince might have pulled some strings to force him back to work. Yes, while no one ever proved if this was true or not, the whole thing left a bad taste in Kurt's mouth. Angry about the situation, Kurt reached out to Eric Bischoff over at WCW, coming to an abrupt end after what became known as the plane ride from hell. Yes, on a commercial flight back from the UK to the US, several wrestlers got out of hand, but Kurt's actions stood out even among the chaos. After having too much to drink, he got into a wrestling match with Brock Lesnar that ended up with both men crashing into the plane's emergency exit, the kind of thing that could have ended in tragedy. When the dust settled from that infamous flight, several wrestlers lost their jobs, and Kurt was among them. For the next few months, Kurt bounced around the independent wrestling scene. Showing up at CERN in 2002, Curt Hennig's story would come to a tragic end on February 10, 2003. He was supposed to wrestle at the Florida State Fair that day, part of his ongoing effort to climb back to the top of the business he loved. But at 10 p.m. in a moment that would shake the wrestling world, a hotel housekeeper made a devastating discovery: Kurt's body in his room. At just 44 years old, leaving behind a wife and 4 children who would now have to go on without their perfect dad.
I lost somebody that meant the world to me. He wasn't only my dad, he was like a brother. He was my hero.
When the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office released their findings on March 26, 2003, the official cause was listed as acute cocaine intoxication. But like so many wrestling deaths of that era, the full story wasn't quite that simple. For Kurt's father, Larry "the Axe" Hennig, things just didn't add up. Speaking in the book The Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Heels, Larry voiced the questions that haunted him. "It's not quite clear to me yet, and perhaps it never will be," he said. "From my standpoint, it just looked like it was one of those one-night deals. Got in with the wrong people." Unlike many veterans who kept their knowledge to themselves, Kurt believed in passing on what he'd learned. Yes, following the example set by Roddy Piper before him, he took countless younger wrestlers under his wing, including future star Brock Lesnar. As Sean Waltman would later recall, Kurt saw teaching others as his duty to the business. But maybe what people remember most about Kurt was his ability to light up any room he walked into. Stone cold. Steve Austin recalled never seeing Kurt in a bad mood, while others talked about how he could turn around the atmosphere in even the most miserable locker room. Today, his legacy lives on through his son Curtis Axel, who carries the Hennig name proudly in the ring. Before every match, Curtis quietly prays to his father. While his story may have ended too soon, his legacy lives on through the countless matches he left behind, the performers he influenced, and the memories he created for fans around the world.